welcome again to the panel discussion of the HUMANIZE 2021 workshop in conjunction with ACM IUI. The topic of the panel is human-centered AI. Are we there yet? And we have 4 panelists, Christina, Dimitris, Elizabeth, and Peter, that I will present in a little bit more details in a minute. I would just like to say that we'll have each of the panelists present her or his views on the main topic of the panel, and then we will this should be like, let's say 7 minutes per panelist, and then we'll see if there is any discussion among panelists, and then we'll give the word to the questions of the audience, and these questions are already coming in the chat, so you are all invited to put additional questions in the chat. So let me present in more details our panelists. Christina Bauer, we already met her. She was our keynote speaker at the beginning. Christina is an assistant professor at Utrecht University. Her research activities are centered on interactive intelligent systems. A central theme are context and context adaptivity, and recently she's focusing on recommender systems. The motivation that drives her research is to create equal opportunities, and here is a link where you can find more info about Christina's work. The second panelist is Elizabeth Lex. She's a tenured associate professor of applied computer science at Graz University of Technology and the PI of the social computing lab at the Graz University of Technology in Austria. Her research interests include music recommender systems, psychology-informed recommender systems, user behavior modeling, information retrieval, computational social science, and algorithmic bias, in particular issues related to quantifying and mitigating popularity bias and confirmation bias. More info at the link provided. Our third panelist is Dimitris Zacharidis. He's a fresh assistant professor at the Free University in Brussels, in Belgium. Before that, he was affiliated with the Technical University of Vienna in Austria and the Athena Research Center in Greece. And his research interests revolve around data science in general and include topics on recommender systems and responsible AI. And you can find more info about Dimitris on his LinkedIn page. Last but not least, we have Peter Knes. Peter is an assistant professor at TU Wien, the Faculty of Informatics, and he's been working for almost 2 decades in music information retrieval research, as well as its implication for users, both music listeners on the site and music recommender systems, as well as music creators, when applying AI in the process of musical creation and production. He's also one of the main proponents of the Digital Humanism initiative at the Faculty of Informatics that aims to put the human at the center of ongoing technological developments. And this is actually quite, Peter, you're running 2 parallel things, right? So you are with now for the panel, but you are also at the panel that is going on right now within the Digital Humanism initiative. So it's great that we can have you here for at least part of our panel. So more information about Peter you can find on his webpage. And I would start with the panel, but with I would like to start with Peter actually, because he needs to run at some point back to the other panel. So we'll take advantage of having you here, Peter, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marco. I hope it's not going to be that bad, so I'll stick around for a bit. But it's true, I have to be back at the other gig also, in some time. Yes, again, thank you for the very nice introduction. And as a disclaimer, I think for what I'm going to say in my statement, I probably will be very, very unjust and express very black and white views and everything. But I think for a panel, that's actually okay, and then we can debate the things. So the main question here being whether human-centered AI, whether we there yet, and I have to admit that. I was a bit puzzled by thinking about the term of human-centered AI to begin with, because maybe it could also just be easily misunderstood. Because when thinking about it, like, is this really human-centric and everything? Yeah, I think it is, because artificial intelligence as a concept is extremely human-centered, because the whole point of artificial intelligence is to make a machine that is intelligent, that behaves, etc., like a human would, more or less, depending on which school of thought and which area from artificial intelligence you're from. But in principle, I think there's nothing more in computer science that is more human-centered than artificial intelligence from that point of view. But I think this is not actually what the question here is. So I think the question that we have to ask, or that we're discussing in a way, is also, or is rather the question of whether the human is actually the beneficiary of what's happening in AI development in the last decades or in the last years. So if the human is heard, if the human is respected in these developments that are going on in AI. And I think on one hand, yes, that is increasingly the case on an, I would say, almost individual level, with more and more research focusing on specific user groups, identifying user groups as more people actually use tools, use digital technology and so on. It becomes more interesting to see how individuals and user groups are interacting with them. And so there is this development of paying more attention to this. But on one hand, I feel like this is almost more like a research thing. And by and large, it's not really happening. So this human centricity is not happening in what we consider to be the big developments in AI that everybody's talking about. So instead of human-centered AI, I think much more than that, we're seeing actually profit and power-centered AI. And why is that the case? Well, because there is data and people are generating data, and it's easier than ever to solve problems through large numbers, big data, and be highly effective in that regard. And based on that, develop new business models with this new technology and with these new solutions. And so, well, it turns out that a lot of business opportunity is coming through here. And many of these businesses are actually built upon personalization and actually exploit usage data, and they exploit a lot of digital traces. But somehow that's still, in my opinion, the opposite of what human-centered is, at least in my opinion. So on a very critical viewpoint here is, I think that these approaches that are used here are merely reducing people to a collection of factors that can be predicted, whether it's about their personality or their preferences or something like this, and modeling the user. I mean, this is the whole goal of all these computational approaches, of course, and therefore having a tool for triggering them also. For instance, triggering them to spend their attention on to digital products. So we're back at the business view here, the business-centric view. This way, or this approach might be personalized. So of course, this is still on a very or more individualized level. But I would argue that for many of these cases, the AI-driven systems actually shape the human more than they adapt to the human. So human-centered AI for the real benefit of humans, rather than just the benefit of consumers or producers of products, I would say we're not there yet. But it does bring me, and this is related to the other gig I'm at the moment, it does bring me to digital humanism, which I think is very related here, and which is an initiative that's not only trying to describe that interplay between humans and technology, which is very complex, and for instance, Edward Lee from Berkeley University even talks about a co-evolution of humans and machines, so that there's this development cannot really be disentangled, or this interplay. But digital humanism also calls for engagement in order to steer these ongoing developments for the overall benefit of humankind. So that can be either in the form of education, can also be in the form even politically in terms of regulation, even to regain control, let's say, of democratic, for democratic societies to regain control over technical developments. And a very crucial point in this regard, and I think this is in a way the key to the overall question and the problem, is to break the silos of disciplines, and as hard as that is, to find a common language and understanding between technical sciences, social sciences, law, etc., which I think is actually happening at the HUMANIZE workshop already. I think this is going exactly in the right direction, and this is exactly on the right path in that regard. And we see generally increasingly methods from social sciences in computer-related conferences, in papers about AI, and so on. So this trend is definitely there, and the borders there are blurring. But I think this is just another indication that a mere technological approach is not going to be the answer when it comes to developing this human-centered AI that we want to. I think in this context, there's an important article to reference by Randy Connolly, who's published in the Communications of the ACM, an article that's titled "Why Computing Belongs Within the Social Sciences." Which of course is also a bit provocative as a title, but it's basically advocating for a change of the mentality that is still dominant in computing. And I agree with him that this change of mentality is also necessary to arrive at a human-centered AI. So let me finish this by advertising a bit for the interdisciplinary lecture series on digital humanism. As I said before, it's going on right now, and as Marco mentioned, we have a panel going on gender diversity and inclusion, and I have to be back there, so hopefully we can have some discussion before that. But anyway, all these talks and all the prior talks are on our YouTube channel, and I'd be very happy to see some of you there as well in the future. And I'll post a link to the chat. So that's my statement. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Thanks a lot for your view. So let's move now to Christine.
Okay, I prepared. I'm here, and I prepared a slide, and I want to share it with you, if you let me. Now, so the big question: human-centered AI. Are we there yet? And I have, from my point of view, a very simple answer. No, I don't think so. We're trying to build something, or actually we act as if we would build something, but there's a gap. I don't see that we have really bridged that yet. With the term, and it's actually what also Peter referred to, what does it really mean? What does the term human-centered AI really refer to? And the question that I ask myself in this realm is, how much human is there in human-centered AI? In my point of view, human-centered means that AI, in this case, is for the human. And I have the impression that not always, but very frequently, research and development is about humans. And when it's about humans, it's called human-centered because there's somewhere some data points about humans in there. So the human is actually a subject of research. And in my point of view, that's not human-centered. That would be about humans. Then I also observe sometimes that some, for instance, psychological theories, so theories that definitely tie to human beings, are taken and then applied out of context to something completely different, to solve some problem that is maybe not related to any humans. And then it's called human-centered because some theory is taken related to humans, and so we can call it human-centered. So for me, that's not the point of human-centeredness. For me, it really means human-centered for the human and in a positive manner. Another question that I ask myself is, well, can something be human-centered without having humans involved? And that's more or less a call to involving more like the people that are concerned in research and development, because people know themselves about their needs, about preferences. You can ask them, can reach out to those users, for instance, reaching out to them to find out how are they affected by the technology that's already there, how they're affected by problems because there is no technology yet there and technology could help. Do we really ask this question when we deal with so-called human-centered AI? And I think many human beings have normative visions. How should the world look like in future? How should it be shaped? And technology and AI specifically may help to reach this goal. And if we don't reach out to people, involve them to find out, it's only those people who are involved in creating this technology, those who decide which data to use, how to model this data, to create their vision of the future. Similar related to that, it sometimes feels that we talk about the average human, and already given an example in my keynote today that everyone is so different and encounter so many different situations throughout the day. So what's the average human? Who do we really address? And in other situations, we may think of the ideal human. Who would the ideal human interact with our systems? Or how, as related to what Peter said, maybe how does a human ideally adapt to the systems that we create? So I think it's really important that we reach out and consider that we have a diversity of humans involved. And in my normative view, it could be a goal, there is an important goal to reach equal opportunities. And that also means which people do we involve in our research and development, which people's views. And last but not least, I think that's for me, it's a crucial point to make is when we talk about human-centered, we frequently say human, but think of the user who is the end consumer interacting with a system that is intelligent or not so intelligent. But there are also many other human beings involved and affected by systems. So we have also to consider non-users. What is the impact on non-users? It seems that in this entire development, we assume that everybody is a user. Their non-users are non-existent and it's their own choice. And additionally to the end consumer, we have the society at large. We have for recommender systems, for instance, item providers or other suppliers who are affected by the AI that we create. And as long as all these human beings are not considered or just very partially considered, we won't reach the goal of creating AI that is really human-centered. So far, my point on this topic.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for being also so timely. So yeah, so we move to Dimitris. Just maybe to help you, I will raise my hand when it's like 1 minute to go for your yeah, opinion. Go, Dimitris. Are we there yet?
Okay, thanks. So I can share, right? Yeah. So just let me do this quickly. Okay, so you're seeing something, right? Okay. So I lost 1 minute. Perfect. So trying to see what does human-centered mean. So what better way to do that than ask the people, right? So there are some surveys that show that about 1/3 say they are comfortable interacting with AI, and only something like 9% are feel very comfortable in their interactions, and more than half express opinions that AIs can be biased or they cannot behave in a moral way. So, but it's much better to look at to answer this question by looking at the popular films and movies, and they all have a common point that AI is some malevolent entity that should not be trusted. So there is at the center, there's this issue of trusting an AI. So if an AI cannot be trusted, then it's not serving the humans. So there are many calls for having ethical guidelines for AI systems. And there was a meta survey that showed that there are different ethical principles mentioned, and the most two frequent ones were transparency and justice and fairness. And surprisingly, trust was not at the top, but this can be explained by the fact that trust seemed like the outcome. So you need to have all these other principles in order to enable trust. So I'm gonna a bit focus on these two main ethical principles, transparency, or as a synonym of explainability. So we've seen that explanations are out there. For example, for adaptive systems, for recommender systems, we encounter just as frequently as we see explanations, we see recommendations, we see an explanation for why this was recommended. And there are multiple reasons why you might want to do that. There might some business reasons behind the promotion of certain items, and the other direction is the fairness in AI, where again there is a lot of research has been happening in trying to define, measure, and then also try to correct fairness or issues of discrimination or biases. So what I want actually to advocate today is that maybe we can somehow combine these two research areas and try to come up with explanations of fairness or what I call. So the user may be able to ask not only why was this decision made regarding me, but would also like to know whether this decision, whether this action was fair. Am I being treated fairly or not? And we would like to have the AI be able to answer this sort of question, provide an explanation to maybe assure the user that, yes, you were being treated fairly and this is why. Or in case there was a violation of fairness, and maybe we would like the system to let us know what caused this, and then further investigate, was it intentional or not? So we want to be able to ask the system for explanations of more complex things, like just a decision affecting me. And because issues such as fairness and discrimination are more complex than a single output, so why was I being recommended this book, for example? It's a much harder problem to solve, and the reason is that it does not only involve the person asking for the explanation, but possible has to include other people that are affected by the system. So so it's not just a single human that is at the center. There's more or less the system at the center, and this interacts with multiple people and with society in general. And so we would like to see whether such systems serve not a single user, not a single service provider, but the whole community. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dimitris. Thanks a lot for this alternative view on ethical issues. It's a Pandora box, I think. So let's yeah. So Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I do not have slides, but I have many connecting points to what the earlier speakers have said. So in terms of what human-centered AI really means, so I kind of like this definition that MIT has. So that human-centered AI is kind of the design, development, and the deployment of systems that learn from humans, that collaborate with humans in a deep, meaningful way. So this is about the collaboration, the human-machine collaboration. And human-centered AI is, like Peter said, it's a cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary effort. So this is not something that we as computer scientists or computer scientists can address due to all the complex points that many of the previous speakers have raised. So we see this now with the pandemic in terms of medicine and AI. So we have now doctors and computer scientists, physicists talking about predicting how this pandemic is going to turn out and how the effects are on the society and so forth. We have it with psychology and AI. This is what I'm doing, and Marco is also doing in our research, where we tried to mine or use insights from cognitive science to improve the ability to solve AI problems like recommendations, creating personalized recommendations. And with that, we already see the problems that AI has. Biases, and algorithms can be a source and a remedy for all of these problems and issues, and this is kind of interesting. Yeah? Problem with AI systems, so I think many of the contemporary AI systems are so-called learning-based AI systems. So they learn from data. They learn, in our case, so when we talk about humans, from human input, from collaboration that humans do with algorithms. And this is what we're doing, like on a constant basis. Whenever you are asked if you are a robot or not, then you are asked to click on like all the taxes or the boats out of a selection, then you're collaborating with a machine already. Yeah? The machine learns based on your input. And what we see in learning-based AI systems, so we could more or less discriminate between two types of learning that's going on here. One is machine learning. This is what is like the current focus from my impression. So we try to optimize learning algorithms. We try to optimize parameters. We try to improve the performance of algorithms. But I think what needs more focus in terms of human-centered AI is machine teaching. So this is optimizing the data annotations. And this is the really human-centered task, more or less, because the algorithms learn from data, and the way data is annotated really shapes the outcome of the algorithm. It shapes whether an algorithm is biased or not. And many contemporary algorithms, especially in the large scale, so we have seen these papers on language models. I think many have seen this famous Google paper on this parrot that had the parrot in it. So where they criticize that most language models currently are just scraping data from the internet, from the web, from any kind of social media platform, from Reddit, whatever, and uses this as a way to train the algorithms. So we have no idea how these data annotations are really created and what kind of problems arise from them. And this should really be a human-centered task, to have good data annotations. With AI-based, learning-based AI systems, we have lots of ethical safety implications, and I think Dimitris has mentioned lots of them. So issues related to fairness, to accountability, to interpretability, transparency. And while these are all very good goals that we should strive to achieve, systems that are as fair as possible or as transparent as possible, it will not be fully possible to have systems that are perfect in these aspects. So what we need is supervision, human supervision for algorithms. This is a whole new level of challenge for human-centered AI that I think we're not there yet at all. So what that means is, so we need to integrate humans into the data annotation, so in the training phase of algorithms, and in the real world operation of algorithms, so in the testing phase. And we should not forget that, I mean, so in general, human-centered AI systems should augment our capabilities, so they should not replace us. Is also something that's important to to stress. So that's always about this collaboration. So are we there yet? I don't think so, and I think all the previous speakers agree with me. But I think there are some exciting research challenges. So let's put it like that. Yeah, I think in terms of like this training phase, so creating meaningful data annotations. So in terms of there's lots of technical challenges. Also, we need to have efficient learning algorithms. We need to find ways to improve data annotation. We need to study biases in training data, especially if the training data is scooped from the web. We need to make sure that we know where the training data came from. And here I like these data sheets for data sets by Tim Gabriel very much, where you have like a kind of standard documentation of where your data comes from and what kind of properties your data set has. Also in terms of like data annotation, so we need to think about the reward function to get humans into the loop. So because we want to have as much human feedback to algorithms as possible. And I'm not sure how you feel about it, but I'm quite annoyed about all the feedback that algorithms ask me to, or the labor I need to do in order to help train algorithms. So, and also the question is really, so it's maybe an easy task to recognize boats or cars in pictures, but what about our values? How can we encode subjective values or human values that are, I don't know, like moral values or like avoiding stereotypes and stuff into the learning process? This is the training phase, and in the testing phase, so where we apply the algorithms, so we also need this human supervision, and this requires interactive elements. So we need to see how we can model and perceive human state, sensing functionality, how we design an interaction that is meaningful, not just annoying for the human. And yeah, and the whole how to supervise an AI, how to provide this human supervision to AI in an ethically consistent and a safe way is an open issue as well, where we definitely are not there yet. But it's really crucial. All of this is really crucial from my point of view, because I think the future of AI really depends on people trusting the AI and engaging with the AI. So we should really make sure to get humans on board, not only users, like Christina said. I like this point very much, so that we have then in the end systems that represent the people who also then will interact with the AI. So I'm done with my input.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good. So we had these 4 rounds, and some very interesting points have been raised about definition of human-centered AI, and about who are the stakeholders that are driving actually AI, ethical issues, and then as Elizabeth said, machine teaching. I don't know. It's the first time I hear this term, but anyways, it was very interesting. So yeah, thanks again. And I would like to now go to the questions by the audience. And it's the first question that we have is from Martijn, and I think at least it resonates very well with me. So it goes like this: do we need theory-driven adaptation, or let's say theory-driven AI in general, or is data-driven adaptation for AI enough? What do you guys think? Maybe let's start with Peter.
Yeah, I think this is a bigger problem, I guess, in a bigger discussion, because I think in a way, in the end, the theory-driven AI kind of relates to, like more of a, let's say, traditional symbolic approach to AI in general, and bridging this gap between symbolic, sub-symbolic. I mean, this has been the challenge for a long time, and it's not that easy. I mean, there's several approaches in this direction, and one could be, like knowledge that you have, or theories that you have, however you want to express that. using that for generating the data or the good data that you want the system to be trained on, but it always turns out to be a bit too artificial, because then it never like the real thing, like never the real world noisy data that it should be, and that is needed somehow also in data-driven approaches. So I think let's say from a technical perspective, I think this is going to be hard, regardless of what your take is on whether it's needed or not. I mean, I think that yeah, it's always approaching the problem from two sides at the same time, and never reaching like the middle with that, and that's why it's not connecting. So in my opinion, I think these are like theory-driven stuff will remain mostly theory-driven, and data-driven stuff will remain mostly data-driven, and then you can try to bridge it in some ways, but these are unfortunately two different things.
You think there's no meeting point in between?
I mean, you can craft them, but I think this is the general, like for specific domain-specific questions, it's always possible, but generally,
okay.
not yet. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Christina, do you have any comment on this?
Yeah, I have two comments. So just because something is difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't try to address it. Maybe this is even the challenge that we want to address, because it's difficult. And I actually see that theory-driven approaches and data-based approaches are complementary. So I actually would see the approaches to what we learn from the different approaches can give us the input to get a better impression of the overall picture. So I actually don't see where this gap is, that they can never reach each other, or maybe the thing is that you want to replicate the same thing, but I think there are several sources, two different sources to create knowledge, and ideally this can be combined and then enrich what we know and how the systems can actually act in the end.
Okay.
Can I add something to that? Because I think that, I mean, the point is, I think this is quite interesting. It was something that had like a thought that I had when Elisabeth was talking about machine teaching, because I was wondering, like, doesn't this, I mean, ultimately, like, I think that's a great idea, and you have to, like, when you push it further and further and further, you kind of end up at the same problems that you have with like human teaching, in the sense of like, is like the world, like, obviously data-driven approaches end up with something like mirroring back society and how humans act, and then you realize how horrible all of these things are, because then you find all the stereotypes that are there, how people generate data, and how actually what's going on, the truth that you didn't want to see beforehand. Whereas the system you're building are always driven by let's say a higher morality, and don't like ever get their feet on the ground, because they don't connect with what's going on and with the needs of people in a way. And I'm wondering if like the machine teaching is also ultimately ending up in that way, if you have to in the end moralize with machines for learning the wrong thing and trying to get out stuff that they learned the wrong way. And I'm afraid that it might not, it might be the same problem that you have with humans. Once you've learned something that you shouldn't have learned, it's very hard to get it out of people. And so it might be the same with machines here. But well, I mean, that's a very abstract, far away, discussion. But I think the core still is this one. There's one thing which is the ideal, and that is often what is expressed, in terms of the theories and in terms of the ideal model. And that is often not sufficient. And the other thing is the ugly truth, which is the thing you don't want to have in the world, because it's doing a lot of harm. And bringing these things together is a larger discussion.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Thanks for the insight. Dimitris, what do you think? Theory-driven, maybe even saying that's theory-driven.
So
like cognitive models and this kind of theories maybe also.
So it's so this is a more general question, like which type of AI is better. So I don't want to take any position in this. So the only thing I want to say is that in this, I will go back to the science fiction and the depictions of bad AI. So there were like, I think from Isaac Asimov, there were like the rules that an AI should follow. So they were trying to think in terms of logical rules and symbolic AI. What should an AI, what would a good AI do? So you were able to dictate these rules, these principles, like do not harm people, right? And I think this is easier in how we think of what ethical should be, but it's much harder to convey in some sort of quantitative data-based definitions. So I don't have any strong opinion on this topic.
Thanks. Elizabeth, what do you think?
Yeah. I don't think we can get rid of theory-driven adaptation completely, of course, because I use a lot of theory in my practical experiment to make sense of data that we observe. So this is kind of, I'm biased here, I have to say, I have to admit this. But at the same time, I think, I mean, lots of the algorithms that we use or that we think about when we think about AI come actually from theory. They come very often from psychological theory. So I was reading quite a lot about reinforcement learning recently, and I was just discussing this with a friend of mine who is a cognitive scientist. And we were discussing the underlying mechanisms from the psychological perspective on reinforcement and from the machine learning perspective. So I think this is not an or, but should be an and, yeah. And one perspective can enrich the other, and we should not forget that many of the findings came actually from theory. And I think now, by combining these two perspectives, we have the unique chance now to validate theory, because lots of the theory that is out there has not been empirically tested in a broader sense. And this is what data-driven approaches now help us. Another aspect that I'm thinking about is being domain specific. And I think Peter has mentioned this. In theory, you can encode lots of domain knowledge in theory. This is what is typically done in this classic way to AI, so the symbolic way to AI. And what it's hard to get these models, but at the same time, so we're talking about the explainability. These models are explainable. This is a big pro. So if you have a very defined problem, and you can spend the effort to create these models, then you have an explainable AI model. Which is also something that we want. And maybe just one comment to machine teaching. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think a great example of how machine teaching can go wrong is I think it's available online on the MIT deep learning website, and there they have created a computer game. So you were going by boats and you had to collect some tokens and to win a race, and they let humans play the race. That's an algorithm play the race. And I think it was a reinforcement learning algorithm, because you could collect tokens. And the algorithms pretty quickly found out that it's most important to collect the tokens. So it went around the track just completely crazy, wildly, did not finish the race because you got more points when you collect the tokens. So the algorithm, in the sense, did something that was not very meaningful. So, and this is then where this supervision comes into play, and these reward functions, how to design this. So this is a very good point.
Yeah, I think it's this is where I wanted to go, actually going to the next question, and it's our last question. So I would like you to be to have a quick take on this. So exactly. So the theory models are the ones that provide kind of explainability of behavior that's on which we train our models. And Jeremy, so I will rephrase the question that Jeremy put here. Are explanations the main driver of user-centric AI? Is the explainability the main thing when we talk about user-centric AI? Maybe a quick answer by all four of you. Peter?
I think it's one aspect, but I don't think that's everything. Is that quick enough?
The other drivers would be, the other strong drivers would be?
For human-centered AI, I think, let me think about that. Let me get to the end of that.
Okay, okay. Christine.
It seems that Peter wants to have the last word. So I think with explainability, that's only the midway. Like maybe it can drive that we want to have explainability, that we fix other things that I consider important. So it's maybe a means to reach human-centeredness, but explainability alone is like, if it's explainable but doing harm, that's for me not human-centered at all. But it would be explainable.
Okay, thanks. Dimitris, you already touched upon this.
Yeah, so I put explainability at the heart of it, and I think it helps create an understanding of the system. So you are able essentially to query the system and understand the decisions. So then you can use that as a engine to do more things, like understand if it is being, let's say, biased or unbiased, fair or unfair. So I would put it as a key research area.
Thanks, Dimitris. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think it's key based on our current understanding, because I mean, in the end, so we want to have trust in AI, and explanations are one way to gain trust, or to make users trust in the systems, because to give them the feeling that they understand it. But I think it's not enough to make AI human-centered. I think it's more crucial to really get the stakeholders into the process of designing the AI and evaluating the AI, who actually then are impacted by what the AI does. And I mean, it's kind of funny to have like book recommendations, but if you think about it, you want to get a loan and you don't get it because of an algorithmic decision, or you don't get into the school, or your kids don't get into the school, or your criminal record is interpreted wrongly, whatever, then it has really a crucial implication. And we have, I mean, there are many examples of where AI is, it targets minorities, vulnerable groups, and so forth. And these people are just not in the design of the algorithm. One of my favorite examples is like the soap dispenser that worked on a sensor basis. And then when a black person wanted to get soap, the sensor just did not work because it was not designed. It was only designed to work on white hands. And then when the person put a white sheet on their hands, then the soap came out. So this is kind of crazy. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Peter and Christina still want to have the last words. Go guys.
Christina can have the last word, of course. But yeah, I think going back and forth now, what would be more important in my mind? I think ultimately it comes down to trust in a way, but I want to say the thing that is kind of like what people agree is not the most important thing, but still I think accuracy and, like making accurate predictions is still a very important thing. And I think this builds trust and so on. So, I mean, of course, these are all dependent, but I think people are even willing to give up their understanding of what's going on, as they do with humans. I mean, this is what they do when they trust humans also, that they will do the right thing, not knowing why, and not knowing how that person is. I mean, this is in a way how like society is also built, that you trust people to do the right thing, and this is something that you earn by showing that you're doing the right thing. And so I think accuracy is still an important thing here, nonetheless.
Okay. Thank you. As long as there is ground truth. Christina?
Right.
So it was touched upon before by the others, but I want to say it explicitly. I think it's not a good way to trying to build trust in something that's not trustworthy, and working on trust, but having AI that's not trustworthy, that's not it. So we have to work on the trustworthiness, and maybe accuracy is one of the aspects, maybe not the only aspect, I would say. So very likely, but we frequently talk about trust, but not in comparison, less frequently about trustworthiness.
Okay, so trustworthiness. Let this be the final word. So I thank all the panelists for joining us and for providing us your thoughts on the main theme, human-centric AI. Are we there yet? And yeah, with this I conclude this panel session.